Definitely.
Yeah. And it's good to have you here because we have interesting things to discuss today. Yeah.
Yeah.
You are working for Hunters. Hunters.ai is, if I can quote the site well, a cybersecurity startup based on technology that is built on top of Snowflake.
Correct.
And Snowflake recently announced a new workload, so a new type of focused type of data analytics that they want to excel at using their own technology. They're looking into technology ecosystem partners. Hunters is by far the most significant player in that area, and you guys are building a solution on top of that.
Yes.
Can you explain us a bit more about the business problem that you're actually trying to solve in this way?
Okay. Yeah, sure. No problem. So the whole thing around cybersecurity in general is that we have been ingesting a lot of different types of data. One of the big challenges within cyber is that data is exploding,
Yeah.
not only in volume, but also in variety. That
Yeah.
means that all that data needs to be put into a storage bin where then it needs to be normalized because otherwise you can't run scale analytics at scale on top of it.
Yeah.
And Hunters found it in 2018, and we were one of the first that actually onboarded the data lake, data warehouse approach for cyber data, where we ingest the data through an ETL process, we normalize it in a unified schema, and on top of that schema, we run our analytics at scale.
Yeah.
So that's one of the challenges that we're addressing in the cyber market. If we then look at the expanding side of things, well, the last 10, 15 years, we needed to worry about endpoints, emails, firewalls. But if we now look at a typical CISO, he needs to run 41, 42 different solutions that are all ingesting into a traditional SIEM. And if you then have to take care of all that different alarms and alerts that are coming out of that telemetry, you don't really know what to look for anymore.
Yeah.
And it's difficult to connect the dots. And that variety and the explosion of data is also increasing the cost because typically what happens is all these SIEMs are stored in traditional infrastructure, meaning storage, compute, and networking.
Yeah.
So if you put a terabyte of data into that traditional architecture, that doesn't mean that only the storage scales, but also the compute and the networking needs to scale.
Of course. Yeah.
The beauty of Snowflake in this case is that it scales data without having to increase the compute. And that really means that it's kept on hot storage. You can determine your retention, whether it's 3, 6, 2 years, 10 years. You can expand that while you grow, and you only pay for the compute credits and the analytics that you run against that data lake.
Yeah. You hit a few nails here. Huh? So the whole story is anchored around the idea of a SIEM. My background is in data analytics, in broad business processes. SIEM is fairly new for us, even though customers are are asking us questions regarding cybersecurity.
Yeah.
A SIEM, if I understand well, is this component, these architectural components, where different events related to security events come together and where some kind of abstract knowledge is built on top of it.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
That is correct.
Now,
it's actually just a log centralization platform for cyber logging.
A log centralization platform for cyber logging.
Yes.
Yeah. And cyber logging, those are things like, and when I log into my Google Workspaces account, Google Workspaces registers the fact that I'm trying to log in. Maybe I made a mistake in my password. I tried 2 times. That's being registered. All that information is actually relevant for a SIEM, if I understand.
Yeah. Every, let's say, entity or everything that can be monitored through a security control, whether it's, in this case, Google, it monitors who logs in, it monitors the time, it monitors the location, it monitors all kinds of telemetry that is regarding that login that you did. What other tools, for example, monitor, like an email gateway monitors which header is in an email, or what was the sender, what was the IP location of that message when it got sent. An EDR, for example, so an endpoint detection and response tool, monitors what kind of file executions happen on an endpoint, or where is the endpoint? Is it a Wi-Fi, a guest Wi-Fi? You can also do how many times did the password, the master password to connect into the laptop was tried. All that telemetry is not only all over the place because you have a lot of tools that monitor, but there is also the depth of that telemetry is increasing as well. 10 years ago, standard antivirus had 20, 30, 40 attributes that got monitored. I think it's now over 1,000 attributes that a single EDR collects on a standard endpoint. And that's increasing every minute because the things that we can monitor or we want to monitor is increasing because we like to get more data to get a better view of what's happening.
Yeah, and an endpoint can be a laptop, it can be a phone, it can be any kind of a device that is connected to the internet and it is causing probably maybe even a security issue, right?
Yeah. Yeah, an endpoint is actually a perimeter device.
Yeah, a perimeter device.
Yeah.
Yeah. We come from another background. Mine is in analytics, yours is in cybersecurity, obviously.
Yeah.
And sometimes the wording is a bit different, so don't.
No, yeah. And I think that that perimeter device will change, and IoT is a brand new word that is obviously there as well. Yeah. The connected car, the connected fridge, everything's connected. So everything that connects and is able to be to log and to provide telemetry of what happened is actually interesting to log and actually putting into your security framework. But if you have a traditional SIEM that is based on a price per gigabyte model, and suddenly you come to your CFO and ask, okay, I have this bunch of brand new devices, but if I want to log, I need to have a lot of data extra into my traditional SIEM. That will charge, that will cost you a lot of, let's say, additional money on top of the benchmark that you already did or have. And with that data explosion happening because of the number of perimeter devices that are coming in, it's the commercial model for a traditional SIEM is broken.
Yeah. So what we're actually talking about is Huntress is offering an alternative to a traditional SIEM. A SIEM is basically a component that gathers what you call telemetry data, events that are generated in endpoints and devices that we own that we connect to a network or to the internet. And you basically provide standard connectors, if I understand well. And so there are a plethora of different platforms out there. There's Google Workspaces. Devices have their own APIs. Typically, if you want to gather data from all of those different systems, it takes a lot of engineering work for companies like ours.
Yeah.
And so there's a bit of risk involved as well. Of course, if you're in cybersecurity, you only get one chance to do it right.
Yeah.
And if you miss an event, if you miss an occurrence, maybe even you are exposed to a big risk and some intruder can enter your system.
Yeah.
So the quality of such a data pipeline, as we recall from our own projects, is actually important.
Yeah.
For us as a consulting company, it would be interesting work to do. We would be interested in gathering data from different APIs, but on the other hand, it would also mean that we have to engage in fairly high SLAs, which we don't necessarily want to. As far as I understand from the website and like earlier conversations that we had, Huntress is offering standard connectivity. So standard extract and load connectivity towards Snowflake. Did I get that right?
Yeah, that's correct. And that's one of the benefits of not having to build a complete, let's say, the API and parsing that data into a storage or a SIEM. It takes a lot of effort.
Yeah.
And if an API changes, you need to change the parser that puts that data into your data lake.
We do remember,
So what Huntress does is that we take care of that problem for you, where if there is a new technology that is hitting the market, or whether there is a customer that likes to have an additional product ingested into our Huntress platform, but we don't support it, we will take care of writing that parser for you.
Yeah.
And typically that's an exercise that we take on. And sometimes I make the joke that we are in the API parsing business, because that's where we are providing additional value for our customers to take that burden out of their hands. And on top of that, immediately prove analytics and machine learning on top of that.
Yeah. So it means that if my organization only runs on Google Workspaces, actually when we deploy Huntress has a standard connector. You just enter your Google Workspaces credentials in Huntress. Huntress starts fetching telemetry data as soon as it's generated, and then it's stored in this central SIEM location.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. So it is stored in a Snowflake data lake.
Yeah.
Depending on where you like to land.
Yeah.
So it's up to you where you put that data, whether it's in your own Snowflake or whether it's in a data lake that we provide.
Mhm.
It's always Snowflake.
Yeah.
But in the end, it doesn't matter where that data resides.
Yeah. So you're actually leveraging Snowflake's capabilities then. So you built the connectors to get data into Snowflake.
Yeah.
You're using Snowflake to crunch through those, well, probably vast volumes of data
Yeah.
because it's cybersecurity data. And from that point on, you centralize the data, you remodel the data, if I understood well.
Yeah, we normalize the data.
Yeah.
That means that we can also strip a lot of the unnecessary data out of the logging that we are receiving from the security controls.
Okay. Yeah.
And when it's normalized, we then are able to run analytics on top of the schema that we've ingested the data through.
Okay.
So that's the whole data part.
Yeah.
As soon as that's done, that's where the actual value for Hunter starts. As we are already in this space for 4 years, our analytics are growing by the day. We are adding new stuff every day based on new threats that we see on the front line. And if we then look at normalizing and also making sure that you grasp the opportunity of that economy of scale for you as a customer, you don't want to reinvent the wheel for every new threat that is coming out.
Definitely. Yeah.
So our platform actually is built in a way that if we see something in the wild, some new indicator that is looking really risky, then we provide an analytic and we push it to all of our customers.
Yeah.
And therefore, with Hunters, as soon as you start ingesting the data, which is, let's say, connecting your Google Workspace, for example, put in your log credentials and make sure that you put that data in. As soon as that data is there, you don't have to do anything more to grasp the opportunity of those analytical rules that we've built.
Okay. Yeah.
And out of those analytical rules, we then come up with a bunch of leads.
Yeah.
And those leads can be everything. It's something that we feel is relevant to tag it as a lead. It can be an IP address, it can be a hash, it can be a domain name. Everything that we saw, okay, maybe this is something that is not coming from the right country, or maybe it's somewhere on a threat intelligence list that we ran, that we cross-checked in your data lake and see, okay, this is something that we should definitely watch for.
Do you use proprietary metrics? Do you use your proprietary framework with indicators, or do you use something standardized? Because I know when we speak to cybersecurity people, they use certain standardized frameworks, right?
Yeah, from a threat intel perspective, obviously we provide our own threat intel, but the beauty of having Snowflake as our partner is that we can leverage other threat intel sources as well.
Okay, yeah.
So there are a bunch of threat intel sources on the Snowflake marketplace that you can easily onboard into your own Snowflake and security data framework. And if we then talk about, let's say, a technique and tactic frameworks, we as an industry work with the MITRE ATT&CK framework. MITRE, yeah, that has all kinds of techniques, procedures, tactics that hackers use to get into your company. And if you are a CIO or a CISO, you would really like to understand, so what is my risk? And our platform provides you a real-time overview based on the number of data sources that you're ingesting and shows you how you are covered against the MITRE ATT&CK framework, giving you also a roadmap looking ahead on, okay, so what's next? I have a few gaps within my MITRE ATT&CK framework that I feel I need to address. With that overview, you can actually see what's my next investment going to be.
So MITRE is actually, if I understand it well, and correct me if I'm wrong, like this framework that explains how an attacker would attack a system. It has different patterns of different ways of attacking. And what you're actually doing is, and that is kind of proprietary, I guess, you're applying those patterns on the data that has been ingested in Snowflake. And every time you recognize a certain pattern, some flag is raised. Right?
Based on the MITRE ATT&CK framework.
And you can improve the quality of that flag and exclude false flags by actually introducing extra information that is provided by third parties, and it can be combined with your threat intelligence using the Snowflake marketplace, right?
We enrich the data, not only so your telemetry that is fed by your security controls in Hunters is also being enriched. So there is a thing called VirusTotal, which is a market standard. So if there is a virus sample, you can check it with VirusTotal whether it's known. If it's known, you can see what's the behavior, where does it come from, what was the motive, what was the profile of the attacking group, etc.
Yeah.
And you can actually enrich your own, let's say, alerts by checking it with, for example, VirusTotal. Yeah. So it's enriching the data to give the security analyst an all-in-one cockpit of, okay, what am I seeing here? What's the risk? How can I resolve this risk? So it also gives you a remediation plan, and it also checks for other controls if they've seen this risk as well.
Okay.
And then I'm coming immediately to our next step, which is what we call our analytical attack story.
Okay. Yeah.
So the attack story gives it in a timeline where if you have, for example, multiple leads that on themselves look like, okay, they're interesting, but not interesting enough. As start as you connect the dots between them, you can see, okay, this was a bad email coming from Larry to I don't know who. Larry clicked on that, let's say, link. He left his credentials. Suddenly, we see from a remote host going back into the Amazon or Google workspace and see some bad actions happening.
Yeah.
Then we see data exfiltration through, for example, DNS logs or firewall logs.
Yeah.
And if you all them sum them up together, you can see that, okay, this was an attack that started from an email phishing link, but the end result was data exfiltration through my DNS logs.
Okay. Yeah.
So
it feels a bit complex, and it makes me think of a situation we had a while ago at a client project. So they had a hybrid cloud environment. They had an on-premise situation, classic traditional on-premise situation.
Yeah.
They went to clouds. They did the cloud migration. The whole network setup was done properly. It was kind of secure. And at some point, they saw an attacker trying to attack the on-prem situation.
Okay.
The attack stopped. Nothing happened. And a while after, there was a new attack starting on the cloud situation. It seemed like it was totally unrelated.
Yeah.
But after not being successful on clouds, the attack resumed immediately on the on-prem situation.
Yeah.
And it felt like it was the same person or group or whoever who was trying to get hold of information residing in our client sites.
Yeah.
And they were not able to tie that together at that point. When you say attack stories, does it mean that you would be able to tie these kinds of flows together and make sure that you can identify this as one party trying to attack us?
Yeah, indeed. That's what we see is also when it comes to high profile attacks or high profile 0 days that are coming out, they come with a bunch of, let's say, tactics, techniques. That are typically what we call a sweep. So we then sweep your environment and all the security controls that are logging, and then we sweep for, okay, so what actually happened? And then it simply is querying a hash or an IP address or a host name. And if that host name then suddenly shows in your environment, then you know, okay, there is a lead that got triggered from this IOC list from this attack group. And then we start to connect the dots. So what happened? Where is this spider moving to? Where is this this pattern evolving into? And that's where what it comes down to is that an attack story gives you an overview, a timeline of what happened from start to finish.
Okay. Yeah.
And that's something that you can report on to your CFO or CIO or CEO. That if it's a high profile breach or a high profile attack, or somebody got, let's say, locked out of his own systems because of a ransomware attack, you can immediately report back and say to your spokesperson, okay, so this is what happened. This is what we did to resolve it. And this is how we, as a company, let's say, learn from it to prevent more damage.
So as a target audience, said that people who are actually using Hunters.ai, is it spokesperson? Is it CISO? Because it feels like the information you're dealing with flows in at a very high pace. If something happens, you need to respond as soon as possible. I can imagine that your audience is broader than just spokespeople. Of course, important tying stories together matters, but who's actually using Hunters?
our let's say our champions, our
Yeah.
heroes
Yeah.
are the people in the SOC,
Yeah.
which is the security operating center,
Okay. Yeah.
that need to deal with these large amounts of data
Yeah.
and need to correlate and understand what is really going on in their
Okay.
systems.
Yeah.
Because in a traditional time, they needed to go into 50 different tools
Mhm.
and look every tool to see, okay, so what is the alert here? Then they needed to put another open up another system. Okay, so I got an alert here, I got an alert here. And what if we now open a situation for them that we, let's say, are the layer on top of all these tools
Mhm.
that can provide, okay, this is what happened. These tools are all giving you the alert, but if
Mhm.
we layer those alerts on top of each other, you have this huge risk that you need to prevent or resolve.
Yeah. But it feels like, and correct me if I'm wrong, huh? It feels like it's a bit late. No?
As
As when you build a journey, when you can say, hey, this happened and these
Mhm.
are the gaps you need to fill.
Yeah.
It might be too late.
Yeah.
Something might have happened already.
Yeah.
Right?
But it's very difficult to protect
Mhm.
against everything.
Probably.
And if you now look at the techniques that are being used,
Mhm.
the goal of the attacker is to remain stealth
Mhm.
or under the radar
Yeah.
for as long as possible.
Yeah.
And he does that in all different ways. So lateral movement causes the attacker, or can open up all kinds of systems for the attacker.
Mhm.
He will leave crumbles, so
Yeah.
evidence that he was there,
Yeah.
but he will never pop up.
Yeah.
So I understand what you're saying. Protection is one, and it's
Yeah.
very important to have proper controls in place that prevent and protect as much as possible.
Mhm.
But it's very difficult to spot the attacker once he's behind your security controls.
Yeah.
And see what he's doing. What were
Yeah.
his steps? What was the evidence that he left? And how can I make sure that I got a proper triage of the case,
Yeah.
to show to my board what happened?
Yeah.
So this is literally a detection and response platform
Okay. Yeah.
that is used by the security operating center to make sure that they have as much visibility as possible to understand how these stealthy attackers behave.
And the Security Operations Center, the SOCA, as you called it before,
Yeah.
it consists of course, of analysts.
Yeah.
But we know cybersecurity, the world evolves fast. Not everybody is trained on the latest techniques. Not everybody is working 24/7.
Yeah.
I heard you have a layer of security on top of, or a layer of service on top of the software you provide.
Yeah.
To actually reinforce those SOCs.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, we have an extension of SOCs. So
Yeah.
we have a group of threat analysts that is called Team Axon.
Mhm.
They are trained and skilled to do large, high-profile attacks. So if you as a customer have an issue, or you'd like to consult somebody from Hunters to
Mhm.
help you with understanding what is going on, but
Yeah.
also help you remediate certain threats,
Mhm.
you can call let's say, the Axon hotline,
Yeah.
and they will pick up and help you with getting the best solution to resolve the problem.
Okay, it feels like that bridges a huge gap. And because when Snowflake comes into an organization, typical first use cases are data lakes, data warehouses, machine learning sometimes.
Yeah.
And after a while, things get more mature and Snowflake gets a bit more exposure.
Yeah.
And what we see typically, the cyber SOCs, as you call them,
Mhm.
they get interested because the speed of Snowflake, it's kind of appealing for the type of use case that they have.
Yeah.
But those SOCs, they typically work within the standard frameworks that they already have. So MITRE is a name that is popping up more often than not.
Yeah.
If we can help those people using the MITRE framework, but with faster engines that they're used to before,
Mhm.
then I feel like there's a gap to fill for a company like Hunters.
Yeah.
And the cases that we are at and the thing that we have seen, they're always deprived of the right people. So cybersecurity analysts, they're in high demand, even
Yeah.
higher than data engineers who can build
Yeah.
ingestion pipelines.
Yeah.
So it feels like I'm having this combination of having software built on top of something as performant as Snowflake and extending that with an off-the-shelf team of analysts
Yeah.
who are doing nothing but looking at high-profile cases, if I understand well.
Yeah.
It feels like it's a compelling offer.
Indeed, and I think that whole resource shift
Mhm.
is one way to solve a large problem. At the moment, the cyber skills gap I think there are 2.7 million vacancies to be filled by 2030.
Okay. Yeah.
So we have this enormous mountain to climb when it comes to cyber analysts.
Yeah.
But if you simply look at the foundation of the problem, I think security is a data problem.
Security is a data problem, of course.
And the data is increasing. The number of different tools is increasing as well. So what we can do is that by leveraging the Snowflake knowledge that, for example, Tropos already provides, but also is residing within the customers, they can leverage that skill to also enforce their own SOC capability.
Yeah.
Instead of going out to the market. For example, if you live in Antwerp, you need to find the people in a very small pond, and that's very difficult. It's very difficult to hire the people, the right people, the right analysts.
Yeah.
But even worse, if that analyst does a great job, and for example, you promote him from junior to senior to maybe manager, then suddenly LinkedIn kicks in.
Yeah, of course.
And retaining these people is practically impossible because the service providers out there are paying a lot more than, for example, mid-sized companies that are looking and hiring and retaining their own analysts. And by making a bigger pool of people, not only focused on cyber, but data in general, maybe is a possibility to solve some of that skill gap.
Yeah. So if I understand it well, Hunters is actually using the efficiency of the Snowflake platform and to run fast queries at a high pace on high volumes. You provide a layer of intelligence that on one hand is already known by cybersecurity people and the MITRE framework. What you are adding is data ingestion pipelines, because regardless of the customer needing to pull in data from, again, Google Workspace, the data ingestion process is always the same, but as a layer as well is always the same.
Yeah.
And on top of that, you try to solve or at least part of the resource gap at customers by having this team of super specialized cybersecurity analysts on top of the solution.
Yeah, and the solution itself obviously provides a lot of analytics that if you simply look at a SOC layout, it's typically level 1, level 2, level 3.
What does that mean?
It means that level 1 analysts typically deal with the first layer of alerts. What typically happens is these alerts are low priority, probably also easily scanned and easily resolved by a computer. So by adding automation and analytical power on your data set, you will probably need not to have as much level 1 or perhaps even level 2 analysts through automation, because a lot of automation is already residing in our platform. And therefore, the people that you hire in your SOC can focus on the high profile level 3 alerts. And they don't have to be stuck in doing repetitive work all day, because level 1s and level 2s are typically prone to be false positives. And by putting that automation to work on top of that Snowflake schema, we resolve a lot of that, what we call alert fatigue, that happens in our industry.
Yeah, and that's the white noise that happens, the overload of alerts that people get swamped into.
Sometimes you have tools that are very noisy. Email gateways can be an example for that. So an email gateway you get a lot of emails. So if you need to go through all these emails every day, and that's your day-to-day job, your day-to-day job becomes very annoying and boring. And by the model that we use to scale down noisy alerts or noisy controls, you can easily say, okay, this is an alert that we've seen for 5 times now. We are now automating this alert, and we downscale the severity of this alert, because the 5th time you can probably effectively say this is not something that we really want to increase the risk on. So what we then do is we decrease the risk. We will keep the lead, because maybe in the future it will pop up in a large high profile attack story. But through automation, we try to make the analyst let's say a happy analyst.
So one of the values that Hunters brings is actually fine-tuning the filter that decides whether something is a real alert, true positive, or something that can be ignored safely.
Exactly.
Yeah. Now you made me think, Roderick, because now you have built actually a data warehouse or a data lake or a data warehouse.
Yeah.
You have these ingestion pipelines. All of this data is residing in Snowflake.
Yeah.
You're adding external data sources from third parties from the Snowflake marketplace.
Yeah.
But it's still Snowflake. Is it the Snowflake instance hosted by hunters? Can it be my own Snowflake instance?
Yeah. It can be both.
It can be both.
It can be both.
Yeah.
There are some customers that choose to do a managed Snowflake instance through hunters. So that's what we offer through our OEM program. But we see more and more, obviously Snowflake is growing rapidly and they're taking a lot of market share in the data warehouse market.
Yeah.
And that's also a big benefit for us because that is really also what CIOs are looking for. They are embarking on a Snowflake journey to have one truth, one single source of truth when it comes to data. And by adding another cybersecurity workload on top of that data foundation, it makes economy of scale, better contract negotiation.
Yeah.
Most important of all is better governance, because if you have to govern your data in multiple silos, for example, in a traditional SIEM, you need to replicate all your policies and all your governance and everything into that another silo.
We are familiar.
If you can keep that within your Snowflake domain, and then simply determine, well, this is my governance across my Snowflake domain, you can run one policy against multiple workloads, which creates a lot of, let's say, an efficiency within your data team, and also from a risk perspective, lowers the biggest risk of, let's say, data exfiltration, or maybe somebody does it unintentionally and shares a link to a certain, the media is full of it, of administrators or developers that maybe had a test data set somewhere that was exposed to the internet. If you try to limit all those, let's say, data silos and have it in Snowflake, you could easily govern that that's not possible.
Okay. So I remember a few cases, things we've seen from a distance actually. Data that was exposed through S3, was on S3. Unfortunately, sometimes it was sensitive data. It got hold of it ended up in the wrong places, let's say.
Yeah.
Is that what you mean by exfiltration?
Yeah. If a developer has, let's say, a training set or an unmasked copy of a specific customer database, and he replicates that database for testing purposes or for development purposes, but it sits outside of the scope of the company S3. So there is a test environment, and suddenly there is, you know how developers work. They try to make development simple for themselves. So typically what they then do is they copy paste a username, password in the script, and that sits within an open connection to the internet. And then suddenly, if somebody has bad intentions or is just simply looking for something, hey, this is something that I can maybe, let's say, hack, that data gets exposed to the open internet with the credentials in the script. And if you want to resolve that, or if you want to prevent that from happening, within Snowflake, you can build all kinds of boundaries and governance around what is able to be shared, especially when it comes to this critical data, for example, cyber data. It has a lot of intellectual property about the company process. So you don't want to exfiltrate or export that to anything else. So exporting rules can be governed very easy if that sits in that data platform.
Okay, interesting. Developers, of course, never have bad intentions, and sometimes projects have to go fast.
Exactly.
So sometimes credentials get stolen by automated scripts, and we've seen that happening in the wild every now and then, unfortunately. So that sort of data leak is actually real, also for non-cybersecurity data. Also for typical analytical data. Sometimes a bit more detailed data.
They get snapshot, or they get copied for development purposes, and that's something as an industry you would like to prevent from happening. So if there is an export of a replication of a specific data set happening, then at least it needs to be obfuscated or masked or encrypted, or that's what what typically is the best practice. If you want to use customer data for testing purposes, it needs to be unidentifiable. And yeah, that's sometimes not the case.
But when the leak happens, for example, with private data, we have to report back to the Data Protection Authority, at least here in Belgium. You have to come up with a story then.
Yeah.
And an attack story, as you mentioned before, is that the story you could bring? Is that like really the trace of how it happened that a certain piece of data was exposed to the wild without us having control?
If those sources are monitored, yes, that's correct. And then we can also see where was the entry. So what we typically, the infiltration, what was the reconnaissance that happened? How did it move within our systems? Where was the, let's say, the execution happening, and how was it exfiltrated out of our office or out of our perimeter?
Yeah, so you can easily recognize whether it was a bad actor trying to steal some organization's internal data, or it was just basically an accident. And by development processes.
If these dots are connected, maybe there was a credential stolen. Maybe the credential was already in the script. Yeah, it's easily traceable if you have the right logs and you can correlate across all these logs that you're receiving from your security controls.
Yeah. Interesting stuff, because those cases are real and they happen, unfortunately, more than we would want to.
Yeah.
We haven't had it on our projects, but we've been exposed to it.
Yeah. And it's the, if we look at the IT discussions that are happening in boardrooms nowadays, cyber is number one.
Yeah.
So it's on everybody's head. It's on everybody's mind. The CISOs are constantly trying to express what kind of risk there is, and having tools in place that easily understand, easily correlate, but also easily report on, okay, this is our maturity level. This is what we need to be spending our efforts in the next year or 2 years or 3 years. This is the roadmap. Then hopefully we can help our, let's say, not only our SOC analysts have a cooler job because their data is better normalized and better structured and better, let's say, correlated, but also our CIO and CISO report to board members, so CEO, CFO, what is going on. Are we really at risk? And if so, why are we at risk?
Yeah. Okay, I get it. Yeah. And after all that value has been delivered, the data still resides in Snowflake.
Yeah.
So if you're a Snowflake customer, your current data transformation tool stack can actually interact with the data generated from by hunters.
Yeah.
And you can build new use cases on top of that.
Definitely.
Yeah, because it's all in Snowflake. It shares the same storage. You can do even machine learning, things you might not offer out of the box with hunters, but that are maybe proprietary.
Yeah. For example, in banking, you can think of anti-fraud, anti-money laundering, all that kind of sensitive. And for a bank, obviously, if you look at anti-money laundering laws and regulations that are now coming out, banks are forced to really spend energy on making sure they get better at that. And including that sort of data, and also be able to monitor and correlate that against cyber data that is coming from your access, from your firewalls, from your endpoints, from everything that is going around in your organization, can make a difference.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting stuff. Good to see that Hunters is building this type of knowledge.
Yeah.
It felt when we started looking at it, it felt like a bit odd, because it seemed like you guys were automating data pipelines that we traditionally used to build, and you guys were building metrics based on frameworks that were out in the public openly.
Yeah.
But looking at it now as a basically data analytics firm, it feels like there's a lot of value add from a team. It is something economically would not be possible to build for one company or even a cluster of companies or even as a small startup to do, but it has, the way I perceive it now, tremendous value in an ecosystem where Snowflake is already at the core. And you're adding new use cases in the core. It's kind of a pre-built application with a pre-built way of looking at it, with a pre-built team available as a service as well, to cover one of the hottest challenges, as you call it, in today's boardroom, being cybersecurity.
And being able to also, if you look at it from a time to value perspective, if we needed to build a SIEM 3, 4, 5 years ago,
Okay.
including all the manual processes, the scripting, the parsing of the data, etc. A typical SIEM implementation took at least 1 year.
Yeah.
Before it actually started to prove value. If we now look at it, how we fix that problem, we ingest that data according to supported APIs. So if we support APIs, and there are already over 90 supported within our ecosystem, which is, we are up there, you can ingest that through that supported API and parse that data into Snowflake. And typically what we then do is we start running that analytics right from the start. So having an operational SOC in days rather than years.
Yeah. Okay, that makes a difference.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, that's clear. So I learned a lot today. So before our talk and while preparing, I was learning about SIEMs, pretty unfamiliar for me.
Yeah.
I learned that there's definitely no value in recreating all of those data ingestion pipelines all the time, because of course you guys can do it more efficient. You guys can offer a service.
Yeah.
The MITRE framework is super interesting, applying these patterns on top of cybersecurity data. And it made me think about other use cases as well. So this technique being applied on cybersecurity data is also a technique we typically apply on healthcare data.
Yeah.
If we, for example, look into genomics analysis, it's the same kind of analysis. And we're not trying to spot an attacker, but we're trying to spot a certain combination of proteins that lead to a certain occurrence of this something.
Yeah.
So cool idea.
Yeah.
Many things to think about. Interesting approach as well. Interesting go-to-market approach. And for companies like ours, like super interesting to take the knowledge you built and extend it with typical things that that are custom to that are customized for a specific use case, and you're not able to do it in central.
Yeah.
All right. So yeah, thank you for this conversation.
You're welcome.
And yeah, hope to speak you back soon on.
Let's see how we can move this forward together. But the cyber workload in general is a very hot topic. So I'm very grateful to be here, and I'm very grateful that I could help you with getting some understanding on the topic.
Definitely, and as well for people who are listening to this podcast, typically they're not exposed to in-depth details of cybersecurity analysis. So as well for them, I'm sure it's going to be super valuable.
Hopefully.
Thanks so much.
You're welcome.